Okay, so now we're going to look at non-duality, which is a very important concept, and this is what mathematics is lacking as a concept and why Riemann zeta and all the um, weirdness is going on, where Riemann zeta can't define complete nothingness in mathematics and complete infinity. That's why we have singularities and we have infinities and these other items. And we'll see why now this happens. And in order to do that, we have to look at what a non-dual state is. A non-duality. Um, so in the example, I'm going to make this circle. And it could be anything. It could be a circle, a square, or whatever. But this thing is the everything itself. This everything that's in here, including the border itself of this entity, is the everything. It could be I'm going to call it 1 in the example. I could have called it anything I want. Infinity, the Tao, universe, God. I could even call it 2. Roman numeral 6, NDS for non-duality state, 0, etc. But very important is, like, no matter what I call it is not the thing itself. The thing itself is the thing itself. If I name it something like number 1, which I'm going to do in this case, remember, number 1 is not it itself. Number 1 is a symbol that represents this idea of every single thing that can possibly be in existence. But 1 is not that. That's just a symbol to represent that concept of everything. I'm going to use 1 just because it's a name that I have to give to something that's kind of indescribable because it's everything. And if I say it's everything, then once again I'm stuck, because what's everything? That's not really telling me what it is, because this could be you and I mixed in with some trees and everything else, and if I call that everything, that's fine, but that's not really giving us the reality of what that everything is. Even if I call it everything, you can't get the concept of, well, everything is trees and us and space and stars and what have you. So whatever name I give it is just a symbol to represent that concept of everything. And so this is the symbol for the everything. And as you can see, I could take this everything and I can cut it up into every imaginable shape. Infinite possibilities of how I can cut up or slice or do whatever I want. Each line, even, just like in mathematics, we can cut up lines infinitely into smaller and smaller points. 1/2, 1/4, 1/8, 1/16, each, even in between 1 and 2, even between two numbers are infinite points. So how we cut up this everything is totally up to us. And what numbers we might assign inside this everything, that's another thing that's up to us. And looking at it from this picture, I could say, well, this circle over here is this big relative to this everything. So conceptually, I could get some kind of idea. But that's only from looking outside of the everything. Can I even make this observation? Because if we were a part of this everything itself, I can't even look into the everything, because maybe I'm this guy over here inside of the everything. And so, therefore, the everything is what it is, and how we cut it up is up to us. So this everything, which I'm calling 1, and I'm going to, just a little example, before I even observe something, I can kind of say, well, I'm about to observe something, and I'll call it X within the state of everything. And this dashed line represents the potentiality of of a state to be observed. It's almost like a pre-X state. And we'll get back to that in a moment. But I just want to really nail home the fact that everything is, in and of itself, everything. And we could give a label like one or infinity or universe. But the label is not going to be the everything. It's just a symbol to give us a concept of what this might be. We call this could be the universe for all we know. But if we say universe, well, what do you mean? Well, you'd have to see the universe and even to start to know what we're even talking about. So universe number one, infinity, they're just labels. So going on, so let's say we have this everything. So what's the everything relative to itself? Well, if I'm everything, or if this is everything, then how can I even observe it? Because I'm inside this everything. So how am I going to see what it is if I am a part of the very thing itself? So how can I even say what it is relative to itself? I can't observe it. It's kind of like your own eyeball. Pretend your eyeball was everything. And you try to look at your own eyeball. Well, you might know your eyeball exists without even looking at it. You could feel it moving around. But even to feel it, you'd almost have to have something outside of the eyeball itself to know it was there, because how's the eyeball going to be felt? Unless it has internal sensors that knows of its own movement, it won't know that it's existing relative to itself. And you could say, oh, well, I could look at them in the mirror. But then, if you look in the mirror, you're not going to see the eyeball. You're going to see a reflection of it, or almost like an imaginary eyeball. You'll never see the real eyeball. You'll only see the light reflecting off the mirror back at the eyeball itself. So this is non-dualism. Again, we're going to come back to this pre-observation idea where I'm going to call this everything one. And before I look at it, there's going to be something called X that hasn't yet been looked at yet. Now I'm going to take X, maybe this is me itself, and I'm going to take X, and now me, the X, with my eyes, I'm going to look at the everything. In order to look at the everything, I have to step outside of everything and look back into it. But in doing so, because I am the eye, or whatever it is that's observing it, then this X that was once there is now out here. So what I'm looking back at is no longer the completeness of everything. It's 1 minus X. And here's X, me moved out of the state. So if I move back in, I jump back in, then X comes back into the equation, and plus X and minus X, and then I have 1 again. I'm back to my full state. Or I'm back to this state where, but this is pre-observational, so basically X is a part of the 1. But as soon as I look at it, if I'm the part of the thing that's looking, and I have to step outside to look at the whole thing, then what's left over when I'm looking in has to be everything minus me, or minus my eyeball. If I'm part of the everything itself. So that's the issue we have when we observe our universe around us. We're looking at everything. We're here, or I don't know where we are, and we're looking at this stuff like we're not a part of the very stuff that we're looking at. So that means what we're looking at is everything but us. And you could imagine there's a whole bunch of like 6 million, or no, what is it, 6 billion people, 7 billion people on the earth. And all these little voids all over, I don't know, here and there. And each person that's looking is thinking that, wow, there's the universe around me. And they're considering themselves as separate. Meanwhile, when we look at all those other people, we see them as part of the universe. You know, oh, there's a person and there's the moon in the background, so they're a part of the universe. But because we can't see our own being, because our eye can't see ourself, and again, when we look at each other, when we look at ourselves in the mirror, we're not really looking at our true self, but just a reflection of ourselves. We're considering ourselves somehow separate from the universe when we're looking out into it, like we're not built into the very universe itself. And meanwhile, we're made of the very stars that we see around us and made of everything else that we see around us. So, of course, we're a part of the everything. So what we're looking at is not everything when we look around us. We're looking at everything excluding us. And in my later lectures, when I go on to physics, we'll see why what we're looking at is just basically the limitations of our own senses is all we're seeing. You know, a black hole is black because we can't see that frequency of light, or we can't, dark energy is, we can't see all frequencies. We never knew that infrared light existed until we had an infrared light detector to even show us that there was another frequency. Take away those detectors and then we never knew it existed. I can't see the light coming out of the remote control when it activates the TV. I knock into the furniture when I shut off the lights in the room. That's the dark matter. That's the dark energy. The stuff that we can't see. We know it exists because we could see that it has an effect on the stuff that we can see around it. So of course we know there's something there, but there's no way to directly observe it until we get the more sophisticated tools to know of its existence. And even when we get the more sophisticated tools, all those do is detect it, but in order to detect it, they have to look at it. And so once it's looked at, it's not the true state itself anymore anyways. So we're stuck with the same concept of non-duality. So again, as I showed in the other lectures, what are the states where unity is preserved when we have this non-dual state? Well, it's pretty much the state itself, and there can't be any differences between it. Because if I have this state of everything, and then I create something outside of it or inside of it, I create a delta X, and then I'm again in that situation where then we have this X that's outside of the state of itself. And then what we see inside, if this becomes a new state relative to that, then we can't have the state of everything. This state of everything is what it is. And because it can't see itself, it doesn't even know how large it is. It could even be nothing. So if it's nothing, how does it know that it's nothing if it can't look back onto itself? And if it does look back onto itself, then something must be looking back onto it, and that would create a delta X value to even know that it's nothing. Nothing can't know it's nothing until it makes the observation and says, I'm nothing. Maybe nothing has a conscious. Nothingness is conscious, and it is nothing. Although consciousness does seem like it's something. So, in a non-dual state, the state itself can't know really how big it is. Because there's consciousness built into the system, then the system can know of its own existence, because its knowing of its own existence is built into the very system itself. So, because I know that I'm here, or I think I do, and I'm somewhere in here, then consciousness must also be somewhere in here. Before I even can look back into itself, I know I'm in here and I'm in there. So consciousness is also part of the system. So the circle cannot know of its own size without observation. Or, the everything can't know of its size without the observation. And by the same token, as we know, if there's a complete absence of everything, it can't know that it's completely absent unless it looked at itself or felt itself or did some type of observation to say, hey, I'm nothing, or hey, I'm something. So any kind of observation violates non-duality pretty much and creates a dual state. Meaning that we now have more than one thing, because in order for this to see that, I have to create this I that can then look back into what's left, and now I have not a completely unified state of non-duality, but I've created duality. I've created this state, and now I have the new concept of the I that looks back into itself. I now have a dual state. Of course, it could be more than one dual states. I could take lots of eyeballs and bring them out here to look back on it, and then I have many eyeballs looking back. But once the everything or the non-duality is broken into more than one piece, then dualism is formed, and so this is now the dual state. This is like the pre-dual state, where the X has not left the everything status to look back onto itself. So this concept is the non-dual state. And by calling it one, I've created a dualism because I've given it a name, and by assigning it to something, it's not the something itself. It could only be a symbol of the something. So that's when a duality is formed. And so, since math and other sciences are observational, the non-dual state is not being accounted for, and therefore a wave-particle duality is formed, because instead of us being imparted in the whole system and just being pure light energy, we're looking back from over here into the object, and we're seeing what's left, one minus man. And based upon our observations of what we can see with our senses is what we get to see. We get to see stars, but we can't see the space as well around it, because there's not enough photoelectric interactions occurring, so it looks black to us. And, the trees look green to us because that's what we observe. That's how the light reflects off of it. And our sensory apparatus is only good enough to look at that particular wavelength. Whereas someone else that's colorblind or even blind won't even see a tree. So it's totally up to the observant person, or who's observing it, determines what the reality is in the first place. So then we, of course, get into a whole nother topic of just that we know of ourselves because we're conscious. And we can't, this whole thing of non-duality can be pretty much broken into the concept that the eyeball or the eye cannot see itself. It potentially can know of its own existence if it has sensors within its eyeball, and then the sensory apparatus is all within the eyeball, and it says, oh, I know I'm existing because I feel my own movement. But I can't observe back into my own eyeball without using a mirror or some other thing outside of itself. And just to wrap up once again how this is all related to the Riemann zeta concept, is that the non-dual state is really, in mathematics, these numbers that are not defined in the language using the divisional operation. Because 0 goes into 0, well, we don't know. If we have nothing goes into nothing, does it go in nothing times? Or what if the nothing is everything? We run into problems here. The same thing, nothing goes into infinity. How many, or nothing goes into 1. Well, how many nothings do I have to accumulate to make a something? Well, even if I use infinity nothings, will I ever get back to something? So these states are undefined because those are the non-dual states, and everything in between, becomes our language of mathematics. And there we have it. I hope that this has been helpful. I try to mathematically show a concept of non-duality and why a non-dual state exists by itself and is complete by itself, and no symbol can describe it, and no observation of it would then represent the whole part of it. Because if we're part of the very thing, then in order to create the observation, we would have to step out of it to look at it, and then the system would therefore be everything less us, the person looking into the system. So there's non-duality. And I thank you for your time.